Hello and welcome to the first devlog for a project I've just decided is called Project Drifter. I want to try and show the entire development of this game through this devlog series, so you'll get to see it from start to finish as I build it. In order for this project to work, we need to make a world for the player to get lost in. Well, not literally get lost in, because that would be bad design. I'm talking about creating a world that the player can lose themselves in and forget about their external distractions for a while. Now, there are lots of ways to do this. Some games have gripping stories and other games have addictive gameplay loops, but they all have one thing in common. They are made not to be believable, but to be logically understandable. Everything has a sensible cause and effect that should help with the suspension of disbelief required for the virtual world. I need to make these understandable worlds for Project Drifter. The more understandable and engaging I can make the game, the more the player will be able to lose themselves in the world. Well, before we look at that, please make sure you're subscribed to my channel. The support means so much to me and it will ensure you don't miss out on any future updates for the project. As you can see from my prototype footage, I have already created the basic movement for the player as well as some minor effects like skidding when turning more sharply and a handbrake turn too. The same movement code for this car object can also be transferred to making ally cars that currently just try to follow the player, and enemy cars that follow the player until a certain distance, then try to veer off to the side so not to get too close. The AI for the ally and enemy vehicles is currently very dumb. They're all permanently accelerating and just turn left or right based on their angle to the player, so they easily get stuck on walls. I'll be looking to improve that in the future, but I think it looks fine for now. The levels, however, are just simple square rooms at the moment, and that's what I want to improve this devlog. I want to be able to create a dungeon layout that is organic and traversable without worrying about the finer details yet. So let's start by looking at some existing examples. Derek Yu's original Spelunky has a really smart system for level generation. The level generation has to be particularly clever as it has to contend with the preference for the player to go down, due to the gameplay being a platformer with gravity. Part of the way it deals with this is by putting the player spawn at the top grid row of each level and then always leaving the level's exit on the bottom row. As a simple overview, it creates its layout as follows. It starts off with 4 basic room types. First, there are rooms that do not need to be a part of the path from the start to the finish. These help to increase the variation of the levels without making them impossible to complete. Next is a room that has both a left and a right exit. Then we have a room that has a left, right and bottom exit. Finally, there are rooms that will have an exit on the left, the right and on top. With these basic room types predetermined, the algorithm chooses its starting point of any room type in a random location on the top row. Then it uses a random number generator to determine whether to go left, right or down from its current location. If it tries to move sideways and hits an edge of the grid, it immediately drops down. When it drops down, or in other words, places a type 3 room, we know that the next room has to be a type 4 room so that the two layers are connected. Since the room of type 4 has both a left and a right exit similar to room type 2, we can loop the algorithm until the bottom row is reached. Once the algorithm decides to drop down from the bottom row, we instead place the point that is the level's exit. So with a guaranteed path from start to finish done, all that is left to do is to fill the rest of the unassigned grid spaces with type 1 rooms. Whilst this system is definitely tailored for something like a platformer, there are definitely ideas I want to take forward into my own ideas, such as the typing system for the rooms, although I'm not quite sure how helpful that will be right now. So let's take a look at another classic example. There is a great detailed blog post on how Vlambeer creates its levels in Wasteland Kings, a game jam game that went on to become Nuclear Throne. The game uses a system aptly known as crawlers. A crawler is spawned in a room full of only walls and destroys a wall tile space it travels through. Different biomes in Nuclear Throne have different probabilities for the directions the crawler will move in, with some favouring less turns to create more long corridors, and some favouring more turns, creating more claustrophobic, tight-knit maps. It will also occasionally destroy a surrounding number of tiles to create a more room-like structure within the corridors. To further the complexity of the level generation, each crawler has a small chance of creating an additional crawler. This allows for the generation to run away in several different directions at the same time. And as for the creation of the actual level layout, that's about it. It's so simple and effective, and they go on to detail how they leverage this system to determine where to place item drops in other locations, but we don't need to worry about that for now. The crawler system seems like a really good way of ensuring that the dungeon we create will be fully traversable, so we'll take that idea forwards. So let's work out how I'm going to create a level for Project Drifter. Luckily, I don't think we have to be very smart, because otherwise we'd be in trouble. Since I'm not having to contend with gravity like in Derek Yu's Spelunky, we're not going to have to worry about the player's tendency to go downwards in a level, or worry about their ability to jump over obstacles to make the level navigatable. It's a top-down game, so we just have to make sure that there's a completable path between the start and end points of the level. Which made me think using something like a crawler, like a nuclear throne, would probably be best for this project. But that's not entirely it. I want these maps to be quite big. It is a desert after all, and it would suck if you could get from one end to the other in a matter of seconds. Also, because my player characters are cars, they can't just immediately change direction. This isn't Rocket League. They need extra space, which again puts additional importance on the maps being big. I think I'm going to be using crawlers to make macro rooms to give a general shape of the whole desert. But the inside detailing of each room will be done slightly differently, and will probably implement some kind of Spelunky-esque numbering system. This will ensure that each room can have interesting events and things for the players to do. I think this will also allow me to generate things like simple quests within a single level, where I can have the start of a quest numbered in one macro room, and the finish for that quest all the way over on the different side of the desert in a different macro room. We at least have a plan for generating the macro shape of the desert, so let's get started making some macro dungeons. So we're going to get a single room creation done. Nice. Make it so I can only place 2 rooms, and oh, it's broken. And now it's fixed. Optimize room draw function on large maps, because otherwise my frame rate goes, cool. There we go. Okay, we now have a massive grid of rooms with exits open on each side, so now we can create our crawler. To assign which doors on a room are open and which ones are closed, I use bit operators and bit masks. It basically means that I can open and shut combinations of doors based on one particular number. So with that done, all we have to do is generate a grid of rooms, shut all of the exits, and then move our crawler around the dungeon, opening exits between the rooms it travels to. And bish bash bosh, I now have a fully connected layout. Now, has anyone else noticed that corridors are essentially just long rooms? Well, I'm going to just reuse my room placing code and bit operations to make the corridors. This works but messes up the art, but we can leave that for future me to work out. The point is we have a fully working, scalable dungeon generator that is fully connected and doesn't have any gaps that allows the player to escape out of the dungeon. But now I've run into another problem. Traditional doors and exits don't really work because they're too small for cars. I essentially just need these corridors to be connectors between the macro rooms. This means making them super wide. And this is okay, because with the rooms being so big, most of the time you don't notice. But you do when you come up to a boundary, because the generator just creates these giant, perfectly square rooms. It doesn't feel particularly natural. You're just driving along and then suddenly, boom, big wall in your face. So at some point later on, we're going to need to work out how to make these room edges a little less flat and uniform and a bit more organic and rugged. But that's another problem for future Madbook, at least for now. We just make the rooms and the levels really big because it's a desert, and because of my earlier optimization to only draw the tiles and sections of the map that are actually on the screen, our frame rate stays alive. Over the next week, I think we're going to work on making the level completable by putting an actual start and finish to the level. I'd also like to work on the visuals a little bit, because although the drifting effect looks really nice, the world seems a little flat a lot of the time, so I think some effects for added depth would be really good, as well as trying to generally improve the game's feel. If you enjoyed this devlog, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future updates. Join the Discord if you want to ask me any questions directly, and follow me on Twitter for even more updates. I'm really looking forward to continuing this project and hearing all of your thoughts on it. But for now, that's it from me this week, so until next week, goodbye.